Welcome to GSWF 2020. This is Rachel Ong, your technical host with the GSWF 2020 team. Before we begin, a couple of virtual housekeeping announcements. Please turn off your videos and mute your microphones and close any unnecessary programs if you are experiencing slow bandwidth. This is done so that we can maximize the bandwidth for all the participants in this session. Please feel free to use the public chat box to engage with one another. This session is live streamed and the recording will remain public on the ERAW Asia Pacific YouTube channel. ERAW Asia Pacific is committed to making GSWF 2020 an inclusive and safe digital environment and will not tolerate harassment of any kind, including but not limited to deliberate intimidation, sustained disruption of discussions. Participants are obliged to be respectful and to avoid replicating societal prejudices and inequalities. Participants who engage in disruptive behavior may be removed without prior notice. And with that, we hand over to our session co-organizers from Fearless Collective.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you're all doing well, and I'm tuning in from Bangalore, India at the moment. I know that this year has brought so much distance and isolation between us, but I'm so grateful for platforms like this one so that we can find each other and come together even in this moment where our borders are still locked down. I'm going to begin by sharing my screen and taking you through some of the work that we do as Fearless Collective. Wonderful. So my name is Shailo Shiv Suleiman, like I mentioned, and I began Fearless in 2012 at a moment of tremendous fear when a 21-year-old girl, Jyoti Singh Pandey, was brutally gang raped and then later died of her wounds. And the country erupted into protests. And while there was so much power and force that we were seeing around gender-based violence and issues in India, simultaneously, a lot of the mainstream media narratives were full of fear. They only perpetuated the idea that women should not go out into the streets or not attract too much attention to themselves in order to prevent getting raped. And it felt like this fear was absolutely counterproductive to the change that we really needed to see. And so Fearless began as an online viral movement of hundreds of artists across the world telling their own stories about gender-based violence, about fear, but in absolutely affirmative ways that reclaimed their own power. And since then, we've grown into a really wonderful movement of women across South Asia who are actively reclaiming public spaces through their bodies and through their stories, through acts of collective imagination. Now, this article actually went out and was quite viral a few months ago when the lockdowns first began in India, where 71% of India believed that being an artist was the least essential job or the least essential service that could be provided in this time. And of course, if you take away, however, all of the music, all of the movies, all of the poetry, all of the literature, all of the paintings, the architecture, the clothes, the color, then there is not much left in this world. So we believe that beauty is absolutely essential. We believe that art is absolutely essential. And this is actually a technique that those who are in power and those who have been oppressive have used for centuries, make us feel like we're worthless and then sell our own back to us. The colonizers took our cotton and then sold it back to us. Or as women, our bodies are often a sight of shame unless they're being used to sell televisions or cars. And so similarly with art, we know that the government in India right now knows how essential art is because they put in something like 400 crores in outdoor publicity, electronic media, and another 100 crores in print publicity every year, which, just to put it in context, is about double of what India spent on ventilators during the last year in the middle of a global pandemic. So clearly, being visible is important to this government. Simultaneously, also, these art installations that came up at Shaheen Bagh, one of India's biggest sites of resistance, the day the lockdown began, the first thing that the government did was to send out government workers to go and paint over all of the graffiti, paint over all of the art that existed at the site of resistance. So clearly, and finally, most recently, a friend of ours and a colleague in many ways as well, Rachita, who runs a comic called Sanitary Panels, she made a couple of comics, stick figure comics, that were against the Supreme Court in a way, and the Supreme Court itself has now begun proceedings against her. So clearly, art is a tremendous tool of power, and often when we talk about power, we talk about money, we talk about class, we talk about gender, we talk about race, but we forget about visibility. And those who are visible are usually the ones who are most powerful. And we believe at Fearless that art makes us visible to each other. So just to give you a sense of the kind of processes we do immersive workshops with underrepresented communities around the world. Our workshops don't look like traditional NGO workshops. They draw in very decolonial ways from rituals, and we come into a very safe space of really addressing a lot of personal trauma and healing. Uh, we are growing into a radical movement of hundreds of women and girls reclaiming public spaces through art and storytelling. None of the women in or none of the girls in this picture have ever picked up a paintbrush before in their lives. But simply through working with us, they recognize that it's not that hard to participate in telling your own story and claiming space. Finally, our murals are monuments to the communities that live in those spaces and the stories that create them. When we think about monuments of power, we think about war heroes, memorials. We think about kings and politicians, but very rarely do you see monuments made to the living, the ones who actually hold up our societies and spaces. And finally, our work is always rooted in positive affirmation because there was a way that out at the protests as well, sometimes the language we use can embody the thing that oppresses us. And so with Fearless, we always work with positive affirmation to actually claim that safe and sacred future that we want to inhabit. At some point, we found that it was very easy to be kind of typecast, and art was additive to a lot of the more intense social justice work, and it felt like we were being asked to design a poster or to paint a mural, but actually what artists do is beyond that. Artists know how to create worlds that don't exist. And so we have also developed workshops, this one that we did at AVID a couple of years ago, where we took 1,800 activists through workshops on the imagination as creative strategy in social justice movements, and articulating and knowing what we want, as well as what we know, as well as how we know what we don't want. Because resistance, we believe, is not enough. Liberation is really what we need. Finally, our methodology is completely open source, and it's being used by artists across the world to actually create change. Like, this was an image I got one Christmas morning of two young girls in Pakistan going out onto the streets in a neighborhood where girls wouldn't necessarily be seen walking alone, and pasting up images of themselves being affectionate with each other in public space. And we believe that this is how we will actually create that safe and sacred future, one image at a time, one reclaimed space at a time, and one fearless space at a time. In moments of political unrest, the Fearless Collective responds by creating beauty. So this, for example, is in Lahore, where after a bomb blast happened where 62 people died in a park, the young Fearless Collective members that we had worked with went back out onto the streets and painted a mural at its wake. Reminding us that in moments of fear and trauma, the creation of beauty itself is an act of resistance. And given all of the ugliness and oppression of this world, the creation of beauty is resistance. So we've worked with communities across the world on making participative public monuments with them. We've worked with queer activists in South Africa, with gangs in spaces that are ridden with gang violence in Liari, in Karachi. We work with the transgender sex worker community in Indonesia, with the queer community in Beirut and Tunisia. We've worked with indigenous communities in Brazil, reclaiming sites that were colonized. Worked with communities of indigenous women in Canada. And most recently, we had the pleasure and the privilege of being able to participate in one of India's biggest protest movements since the independence in 1947. I'm sure some of you heard about this, but on the 11th of December, actually a little bit over a year now ago, the Indian Parliament passed a very controversial citizenship amendment bill, which combined with the newly established National Register of Citizens, paved the way for millions of Indian Muslims to be stripped of their citizenship. And so, in response, thousands of people spilled onto the streets in India, united in protest, asking for this act to be repealed. Over the next month, the uprising grew to a size and scope that we haven't seen since our independence movement. And what was really incredible was that this was led by a group of Muslim women who were basically blocking a national highway with their bodies. Um, Being out there, what we also recognized was that in spaces like this, in the middle of a national crisis, art was not just additive, but it was absolutely essential. The poetry, the resistance poetry, our constitution itself is a piece of art in many ways. And so late into the night, we'd be out on the streets singing Faiz Ahmad, Faiz, and other revolutionary poets. And we really recognized how, particularly in South Asia, there is no differentiation between culture, art, and the changed world that we want to inhabit. I'm going to just share a little bit of a video from our work there. So out on the streets of Shaheen Bagh, amongst gunshots in the background and mobs of Hindu men, we sat with these women and we created a permanent monument to their stories and to their resistance movements. And like I mentioned, in this beautiful temporal space, poetry, art was not something that was additive. It was actually essential. It was the first language. And we do believe that beauty is our mother tongue. Beauty is our first language. And it is the way that we will call in that future that we want to inhabit. So, and while, of course, when the pandemic first began and 1.3 billion people in India went into the biggest lockdown that we've known, while the protesters themselves were removed, while all of the graffiti was painted over and the tents were removed and the highway was reopened for no one to use for 2 months. But this mural still remains, and it remains as a permanent monument to these incredible women that led this resistance movement. So we're all collectively feeling this insane moment of fear with the global pandemic, with authoritarian regimes all over the world. And as a group that primarily works in public space, when the lockdowns began, we began to ask ourselves, now what? Now what are we going to be doing? And how do we continue to resist? And at first, we did what the rest of the world did, and we jumped onto different Zoom calls and connected with different activists and led workshops across borders. But we soon recognized that, especially in a country like India, Zoom and digital spaces are extremely exclusive spaces. And if anything, our work is really about reactivating public life, about engaging beyond the echo chambers that sometimes digital worlds can create. And so, as soon as we could, we were back out on the streets, and we created a strategy for a pandemic response, which allowed for us to continue to work in participative ways with communities who were most affected by the pandemic, but in ways that also ensured their protection. And what we also found was that in this time of isolation, those who were already on the margins, those who were already rendered invisible, were becoming more and more invisible. Those of us who had the privilege to be able to isolate were doing so. But in the meantime, I'm sure some of you saw, horrific images of thousands of people walking home across borders in India, or walking across the breadth of a country, migrant laborers stranded. And so it felt like, with the amount of fear and trauma that was actually coming up in this time, we needed to be back out onto the streets, and actually making sure that those who were invisible were made even more visible than before. So we began a countrywide tour. Just going to play this one, which we call the Fearless Yatra. We've just wrapped up the Fearless Yatra, a 3-city tour. We went from Lucknow exploring desire and the feminine, to Delhi exploring essential services and the waste picker community. We went with Dalit and Muslim women there. And finally, we found ourselves in Jaipur making a monument to love. This has been quite the journey, especially in the middle of a pandemic. As people began to get back into their work, we decided that it was time for us to respond as well. Given all of the fear that this time has brought for us in different ways, the fear of dying, the fear of losing your breath, the fear of losing your livelihood, the fear of losing someone that you love, it's been a difficult time for so many of us, and we do believe that the creation of beauty is an act of resistance. It's moments like this that are full of fear, that need art, that need beauty and need love the most. And so as we've gone from space to space, we've seen how people have been affected by this in a variety of ways, and hopefully made the world a little bit more inclusive and a little bit more beautiful than it used to be. So the foundation of the work that we wanted to do as a pandemic response on this nationwide tour that we just did was really working with people who had been most affected by this time, and whose stories were most invisible during this time as well. And so in Lucknow, we worked with a group of Muslim women on reclaiming desire and public spaces as a societal pleasure. In Delhi, we were working with the waste picker community, who are primarily Dalit and Muslim women, which is exactly the stories that we would love to tell you today. And finally, in Jaipur, we worked with the LGBTQ community there and made one of India's first monuments to queer love. So jumping straight into the work that we did in Delhi, essentially we did a project called Essential that really looked at who was considered essential in both our social as well as environmental ecosystems, and what was the role that they played. A lot of our work isn't just about exploring gender, but is also about exploring the intersection of gender, of migration, of labor, and the environment. And in Delhi, we decided that we were going to work with a group of Muslim and Dalit women from the waste picker community. Play another video.
हमारी चीज़ क्या होता है, जैसे आप लोग अच्छा घर की है। अब जो खा पी के फेंक देता, पन्नी में बांध के खत्ता पे फेंक देता, वो हम लोग बीन के लेके आके हम गोदाम पे बेचता। कोई तो अच्छा नज़र से देखता तो बेचारी कबाड़ी वाला कबाड़ा थोड़ा बहुत घर पे होता तो उसको गरीब आदमी को, इंसान को दे दो, बच्चा उच्चा पालेगी, खिलाएगी ऐसे। और कोई तो इंसान ऐसे दूर से देख के बोलेगी कबाड़ी वाला आया, यहाँ से भाग जाओ, ऐसे बोले।
So during the lockdowns, waste segregation was not made into an essential service by the Indian government, which meant that all of the waste that our cities were generating was going straight into landfills. As we ordered in and sanitized ourselves and bought disposable masks and gloves, all of that went straight into landfills. And it also took away the livelihood of an entire community of women. The waste picker community that we worked with are predominantly Dalit and Muslim. And especially in this current moment in India, with Muslims being potentially, their citizenship revoked, with I'm sure some of you may have heard about the rape that just happened in Hathras of a 19-year-old girl who was a Dalit girl. And the stories of Dalit brutality and oppression are far too many. And simultaneously, we don't actually, while we read about those stories, we don't necessarily read as much about Dalit life and livelihood or Muslim life and livelihood. And these members who are considered the most disposable, quote unquote, parts of our society are also actually providing the most essential service to both our environments as well as our social ecosystems. So when we arrived in Delhi, we were given a location pin to meet one of the community leaders from the waste picker movement in Chanakyapuri in Delhi. And Chanakyapuri is a very fancy part of town. Like, it's surrounded with all the embassies. It is really the center of power. And we found it quite interesting that we were being called to meet one of the community leaders of a waste picker movement in that space. And upon arriving there, we recognized that the jhopadi, or the informal settlement that they all live in, is literally bang smack in the center of all of the embassies, some of the highest security in our national capital. And hidden amongst that is this incredible, almost wonderland of waste, where the women who work there are almost like environmental alchemists, where all of the city's waste that is generated comes there, and then it's segregated and turned into something else. They turn lead into gold in a way, and prevent tremendous environmental damage, as well as actually keep our cities clean. And so as we walked around Chanakyapuri, we realized that every single thing, everything, has a purpose or can be repurposed. Nothing is ever wasted. Everything turns into something. In the houses, the rooftops, old discarded sheets of plastic and metal were rewoven together to turn into protection from rain. We saw children playing around with bottles and making beautiful toys out of bottles. And it really became into this almost, like I said, space of wonder, of alchemy, of magic, of regeneration, which is a very different impression than our impression generally of the waste picker community. So I'm going to let Gayatri just introduce a little bit about the community that we were working with.
Hello everyone, good morning. My name's Gayatri and I work with the Fearless Collective as well. I'm a photographer based in Bangalore in South India, and the focus of my work sort of lies at the intersection between gender and the environment. And I had the privilege and the pleasure of going with Fearless for this entire tour. And to be honest, for me, Delhi was the favorite of the three cities, just because of how intimately we were able to work with this community. And I spent the majority of our 10 days in Delhi with the women from Vivekananda camp, sort of following them at work, spending time with them at the camp at home, and documenting their lives and sort of making space for them to tell their stories to people who haven't heard them before. So, I mean, just to wind back for a second, we were working in Delhi with our community partner over there was this really incredible organization called Chintan, who are an advocacy, research and outreach group that work with the informal sector in Delhi, the informal work sector. And a large part of the workforce whom they support are the waste picker and waste segregation community. I mean, these are people who really exist on the margins of our cities, are severely invisibilized, and have very little recognition or even protection in their lives and in their labor. So Chintan runs this really incredible initiative called the Safai Sena, which is a group of about now, we were told 12,000 informal waste workers around Delhi, who they have mobilized and held training sessions with to sort of make them aware of their rights. And then as a result of that, they sort of have a louder voice in demanding better pay and better protection in their work. So if we go to the next slide, so this was me following one of our ladies, Isma, around Delhi while she was collecting work. And we have a slide here of Chitra from Chintan, who sort of is describing who the waste picker really is for those who might not understand, and the crisis that they faced during the pandemic.
In India, we have a hierarchy of waste pickers, waste workers actually. You would see the common waste picker on the road. He would be the man who has a bag on his shoulders, picking up plastic, paper, cardboard, any of the dry recyclables that we don't understand is actually of value, which we throw away. And the waste picker on the road, actually, you would see a very poor man in rags, and he would be the one who is picking up all your dry waste. And there are also people who actually come home to buy waste off us. So the person we call a kabadi. So he would come and buy your newspapers at the end of the month, or your plastic bottles or your glass bottles. So the kabadi and the waste picker or the kudawala, both of them sell it to a scrap dealer. The scrap dealer is a guy who buys all these dry recyclables and pays them for it. The scrap dealer will then sell it to a bigger scrap dealer, who then sells it to a recycler, who probably has a big godown and deals in one kind of waste. It could be just one type of plastic or one kind of cardboard. So this is the hierarchy, and we have about 2 million of such informal waste workers in India. And in Delhi alone, we have about 1.5 lakh people who are informally working in waste. The ongoing pandemic is a terrible thing for all of us. But people like me and you, we can actually sit at home, and we have the luxury of working from home. But think about the urban poor, think about the informal sector who are actually daily wage laborers. And one of the most prominent of such daily wage laborers is actually the informal waste worker, who has to go out and be on the road every day, collect his paper and recyclables, and then sell it, and that's how he makes a living. So he needs an earning every day. Now, during the pandemic, for the first 2 months, India had one of the strictest lockdowns in the world, and Delhi had a very, very strict lockdown till June 15th. So it literally meant that every informal waste worker was shut down at home. He was not allowed to go on the street. He was not able to pick up his waste. He was not able to sell his waste. The entire value chain of waste just crashed. So for this person, this informal waste worker, life was, I think the livelihoods and the income just came crashing, because there was no waste to buy or sell. And many of them, I mean, they had to take their children out of schools. They had no food to put on the table. So it was a very, very dire situation. It was a situation of live or die for informal waste workers. Plastic pollution has come to stay in the world. our Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, said that by 2021 or 22, we are going to eradicate all the single-use plastics that India generates. Now, a lot of plastics are single-use, like multi-layered plastics, PET bottles, all of this. The waste picker is actually the only one who is picking up this kind of waste, any dry recyclable, and even the single-use, like there are single-use plastics like gutka packets or chips packets which are of no use. But there are other plastics like PET bottles which has a high recyclable value, and the waste picker is picking this up. So the waste picker is actually one of the, one of the single most people who is actually working in recycling, and is the whole informal waste sector is the backbone of recycling in India, which is why we have one of the highest recycling rates in the world. So the waste picker is definitely a champion of recycling.
There were some very interesting points that Chitra made there. And I mean, one of the biggest challenges really faced by this community is the fact that they are not recognized. This is an informal workforce. So there, like on every day during the lockdown, there was a garbage collection that was taking place, that that the official government workers were doing. But the community who we were working with have no identity cards, and the work that they do is not formally recognized by the government. So basically, they had no way to go out in the day for every day during the lockdown to continue working. And if they were not working, they were not able to earn that day, which made putting food on the table a lot harder for their families. And as a result of this, waste was just going, like unsegregated waste was just going straight into landfills, like Shiloh was saying. I mean, just to give you a sense, we were speaking to another NGO here in Bangalore who do very similar work as Chintan. And we were told, I mean, Bangalore actually does quite well in terms of citywide waste segregation, because there is a lot of procedures have been put in place. There's a lot of segregation that happens at source here in Bangalore as opposed to Delhi. And during the lockdown, because the informal waste workers could not do their work, there was about 3,000 tons of unsegregated waste going into landfills every day. And this is Delhi, and this is in Bangalore, which is a much smaller city than Delhi. So this is the sort of the community who we went to work with in Delhi. And I mean, when we say community, it sort of removes the individual identity of the women who we were working with. And we wanted to take this time to introduce some of the characters of our story. So to start with, this is Shahnara Begum, who lives in Vivekananda camp. She is a Muslim woman from a village in West Bengal. She moved to Delhi about 7 years ago or so with her husband, just after they got married. And both her and her husband are waste pickers and have been doing this work ever since they moved to Delhi. Shahnara was extremely shy and reserved during our workshop, and then slowly over the course of the week, she sort of warmed up and spoke to us more. And as it turned out, she was one of the 2 women who we painted on the mural. And you're seeing the image of her behind her. And in the next slide, we have Shobha, who, Shahnara is a Muslim woman, and Shobha belongs to the Valmiki community. Shail, if you go to the next slide. Shobha, actually, her and her family, she lives in the camp with 3 of her sisters, no longer do this work. They no longer work in waste segregation or collection. They now work as domestic help in people's homes, which is sort of like in the hierarchy of work at the camp is sort of a rung up, because they've been able to leave the segregation and waste picking work behind. But she's been out of work since the lockdown. She hasn't had a job. And in our next slide, we have, Shall, do you want to go next? We have Jharna, who is also from West Bengal. Jharna is sort of the community leader for the women, especially the women who we were talking to. She is this firebrand young woman who's extremely bold, unafraid of speaking her mind, and really motivates the women who live at the camp as well to stand up for themselves, because these women and these communities are especially vulnerable to basically on every front. They're not recognized by the government, so there's no protection in terms of their where they live, how they live, their work, their working conditions. They're harassed by police, they're underpaid, there's no sort of standardization of pay in the work that they do. So Jharna is really active in inspiring the women to sort of stand up for themselves. And she's the go-between Chintan and the women of the community, and has been working with Chintan for a while now. Chintan's been working with the women of the camp for about 12 years. And next we have, I think it's Mosina and Moba on the right. Mosina on the left is Jharna's older sister. She moved to Delhi much before Jharna did. And she's a much shyer woman than her younger sister Jharna. And on the right is Moba. Both of them belong to the same village and live very close to each other at the camp. There's this really, at the camp, this very intimate bond that the women share. I mean, a lot of these women come from the same village, and that's how they've come to Delhi as well, because there was one family that moved to Delhi, and then over the years they've sort of gone back to the village and called more people who have basically been looking for work opportunities in the city. So they've migrated to Delhi to do this work. And next we have, who do we have next? Do you want to switch the slide? We have both Dulali on the left. Dulali is sort of the life of the party always. She's this tall, stately woman who is always laughing and making everybody laugh. She is also from West Bengal and lives in the camp, and she still does waste picking work. And on the right we have Meenu Begum, who is one of the older women who we were engaging with, also from West Bengal. And Meenu is one of the people who's been living in the camps for the longest time. She goes out to collect waste and segregate waste with her husband every morning. They leave at like 4 o'clock in the morning and bring back their like cycle piled up with waste, and then her children are the ones who, she has grown children who do the segregation work. So she lives in the camp with her whole family. And next slide, Shell. Yeah, so I mean, so these are sort of the really colorful characters who we worked with, and I'm going to let Shiloh talk to everybody a little bit about the workshop that we conducted with the women.
Yeah, and I think thank you for sharing those stories, Dayu. And I think one of the things also that we've been talking about a lot within our own Fearless universe is that, you know, when we speak about working with the community, the Dalit community, the Muslim community, they become into this amorphous, vague collective of people, but actually those collectives are made up of individuals who have stories, who have emotions, who have intricate personal histories, who fall in love, who have hardships. I think at the, sorry, I think someone's off mute there. But at the core of our work is really looking at those individual stories, to really look at those lived experiences and have that be the foundation for empathy between communities and between individuals. So with the Fearless collective workshops that we do, like I said, they look less like workshops. There are no post-it notes. And they look more like rituals. We create really beautiful, intimate spaces for people to be able to share their emotions, and we use ritual as a participative action to go deep into an emotional space that really allows for people to speak from a space of truth and honesty and vulnerability. And in our workshops, usually there are two parts to our workshops. One is about catharsis, just getting it out of your system, because the fear, the trauma, the hardship is very real. And the second part of that workshop is then transmutation, where people move beyond the wound into a space of articulating what we want and what we want to call in. And in this particular workshop, since we were working with Dalit and Muslim communities that really, despite being the backbone of our societies, are often at the bottom of the pyramid, we decided that we wanted to work with this idea of treating them as essential lives, as essential labor. So in the first part of our workshop, since this is a community that works primarily with waste, we asked them to take this big piece of paper and crush it with their hands and articulate, what do you really want to dispose of as a group of people who literally go through garbage bins every morning to be able to segregate and look at all of society's waste. What do you think in our society is actually completely wasted that needs to be gotten rid of? And interestingly enough, it actually became into a space of a lot of rage and a lot of anger, and a release of a lot of anger towards the government, anger towards judicial systems, anger towards the police, anger towards medical systems that, despite them doing a work that was essential, really gave them no space and gave them no privileges at all. And so as each of the women crushed up these pieces of paper, they spoke about a lot of their own trauma and a lot of their own stories about not feeling like they were essential at all and not being seen as essential. In the second part of our workshop, we had created this big kind of beautiful throne of sorts made out of plastics and leaves. And in Indian societies, when someone comes over who's very important, who's upper caste or is from outside of the country, is considered very important, they're given a chair, and often these important people are often also garlanded with flowers as a sign of respect. And so with each of these women, we basically had them come and sit on this magnificent throne that we'd created out of waste, and wash their feet with rose water and put a garland on themselves as a mark of their own importance, and answer the question, "Aap zaruri kyun ho?" Why are you essential? And the answers that spilled out were absolutely beautiful, because some women spoke about how they were essential in their families because they're the ones who made everybody laugh even when things were really bad, or how they were essential to their husbands, or how they were essential to their cities because they were the ones who were cleaning up the cities, how they were essential to the government because if not for their votes, the government wouldn't have the power that it does. And one by one, these women claimed the dignity that they were never given, claimed the importance that they were never given. I'm going to play a small video clip from our workshop.
आप सबको नमस्ते, मेरा नाम
झरना
झरना
झरना है। तो आप पहले आपका पाँव थोड़ा सा वो गुलाब जल से साफ कर लीजिए। हाँ, बहुत खूबसूरत। और ये माला लगा दीजिए आप खुद के ऊपर।
आरता लेकर माता बनाएंगे।
बहुत खूबसूरत। तो अभी आप बताइए, आप ज़रूरी क्यों है?
मैं ज़रूरी इसलिए हूँ, मेरे घर में मैं एक दूसरे को लेकर चलने वाली हूँ। मतलब हमारे घर में जैसे कुछ प्रॉब्लम होता है तो मैं सॉल्व करती हूँ, अगर मेरे से नहीं होता तो फिर मैं बड़े बड़े से बोलती हूँ। मैं इसलिए ज़रूरी हूँ हमारे घर में। और जैसे मैं समाज में होती हूँ, जैसे कहीं कुछ होते हैं तो मैं जाती हूँ साथ उनके, मदद कर देती हूँ और दूसरे की मदद भी लेते हैं हम। इसीलिए मुझे डर नहीं लगता है किसी से, क्योंकि मैं ठीक हूँ तो दुनिया भी ठीक है। अगर मैं हार मान जाऊँगी तो दुनिया और हमारे पर हमला करेंगे, इसलिए मैं ज़रूर दूँ। और जैसे कहीं कुछ होते हैं, जैसे किसी की कोई कुछ कर दिया, किसी पुलिस से नहीं डरती हूँ मैं। पुलिस से कोई नेता आ गया तो झिझक मैं बोल देती हूँ, आप ये काम नहीं करवाए थे पिछली बार, आप पिछली 5 साल पहले करके गए थे, बोले कि वादा करके गए थे, हम ये करवाएंगे काम।
As each of the women articulated why they were essential, because they were fearless, because they were courageous, because they made people laugh, because they did the work that they did. as each of them articulated this, all of the other women in the group said, "Aap zaruri ho," which means, yes, you are important, yes, you are essential. With a lot of the work that we do, we claim the privilege, the dignity, the love that we were perhaps never given, the space that we were never given. In a big part of our workshop also, since eventually it leads to public art, is we do immersive sessions on self-representation. A lot of these communities are often represented by other people, and in the process of that can either be further patronized or victimized, or typecast. And so to be able to express the spectrum of identities and realities that these women are, we do workshops on self-representation, which Gayu will just tell you a little bit about.
Hi, yeah, so this was actually a very interesting process for us, because after the workshop, after we were talking to the women about the rubbish that they wanted to get rid of from their lives, from society, going into why they considered themselves essential and really claiming that, we wanted to paint this giant mural. And we wanted this mural to be a space of reclamation for them in the city where they have been invisibilized. And so we started talking to them about sort of how they feel like their communities have been represented. And the truth of the matter is that either they haven't been represented well, they've been represented as victims constantly, or they're just invisible, like even in popular cinema or in books. And it was quite interesting because we spoke to the women about how they wanted, what they wanted painted on the wall, and how we could begin to compose this image. And they sort of looked at us to say, like, what, why don't you do this for us? Like, we don't really know how we want to represent ourselves. And I think that was an interesting challenge, because for us, because obviously coming in, we didn't want to be the ones representing them. There had to be we really wanted it to come from a discussion, and really wanted it to come from them. And it was something that we had to sort of slowly coax out, and then there was a little bit of back and forth, and that was interesting learning for us, because maybe this is a process that might need to take longer, speaking to communities about how they have been represented, why representation is important, and then how they want to represent themselves. So we sort of I was the one who was making the picture, and we got the women to stand in front of the camera and really think about how they want it to be seen. Like in an image, when you look at an image of yourself, like even very sort of fundamental things, like what color do you want to be wearing, what sort of body language do you want in this image to represent that represents you. Do you want to be seen working? Do you want to be seen associated with your work at all? And the truth of the matter was that a lot of these women, I mean, of course, don't want to be doing the work that they do. They do it because they have no choice. I mean, who wants to wake up at 3:30 a.m. every morning and stick your hands in public dustbins, right? So there was this, and that sort of really got us to think about how, yes, of course, their work is essential, and it's important for them to consider themselves essential, but it's also incredibly important, and it is our responsibility to give this community the recognition that it needs. So in the end, we sort of ended up working together to compose this image. And I'll let Shiloh speak a little bit about the image that we composed, and then going into the mural that we painted. Just before that, we have a little clip here of Isma. This is Isma Begum, who is one of the women who we support.
हम नहीं चाहता था हमारा बच्चा भी कबारा चुने, लेकिन क्या करें, आप बता रही कि यार नसीब में किसका किसके में। अगर हमारा तरफ भी कबारा चुनने लिखा होगा तो ऐसे चुनेगा। जिसे मैं लड़की को अच्छा घर में शादी दिया, वो तो कबारा नहीं चुनेगी। अगर आ भी गया दिल्ली तो चलो अच्छा काम है, थोड़ा साफ सफाई का भी कर लेगी, किसी का कोठी में हो। लोगों का मन में अच्छा होगा तो उन लोग जैसे इंसान है, हम लोग भी ऐसे इंसान है। हम लोग पेट के लिए कबाड़ा चुन रहे हैं, ऐसे इसके बुरा नज़र से देखना भी नहीं चाहिए।
Hi, back to me now. So what was also really interesting as we were speaking to these women is this recognition that truly nothing is ever wasted with the work that they do. Everything turns into something. And in that sense, they are really environmental alchemists, because what we consider waste, what we perhaps don't even notice, like the sellotape on a delivery box, a straw, an old toy, a book that we've never really read, an old notebook, a broken pen, the tube of a broken pen, every single thing turns into something for this incredible community of women. And to have this kind of intimacy and knowledge also of the material universe is something that is super fascinating, because as they are dismantling and segregating metal caps from glass bottles, from plastic straws, there is also a kind of intimacy with how things are created and constructed and deconstructed, which is not something that I think a lot of us have that kind of awareness of. We simply inhabit the world without necessarily knowing the material that actually makes up the world. And we had this incredible moment with one of the women in the wastepicker community, where she began to talk about how nothing was wasted, even human hair, even bones, everything could turn into something. Everything had the potential to turn into something, which, especially looking at it from the lens of almost geologies and nature and how nature functions, in the natural world, everything does turn into something. A leaf will generate more life when it falls on the ground. Water replenishes, goes up into the air and comes back down as rain again. Everything has the ability to be able to shape shift. Nothing is created or destroyed. And similarly, if we begin to treat even the plastics that we create, even all of the new materials that we create with that kind of reciprocal dignity and kind of engage in a relationship with those materials, then they continue to generate more life. And so through working with these women, we actually ended up having a very interesting lesson on the circular economy, and how if everything is placed into its right place, everyone has an essential role to play within our ecosystems. So I'm just going to play this clip of her speaking.
सब इस्तेमाल हो रहा है, कुछ नहीं फेंक रहा आजकल।
अच्छा,
सब
तो फिर फेंक का क्या जाता है?
फिर क्या किया जाता है? कपड़ा भी फटा हुआ होता है, वो भी
आजकल वो भी छोटे कर रजाइया जाए, गद्दा वद्दा सब बन जाता है आजकल।
हाँ, तो वो भी यूज कर सकते हैं। हाँ,
जैसे ज्यादा पुराना कपड़े है यूज नहीं होगा, उसको क्या करते हैं, छोटे काट के गद्दा वद्दा बना देते हैं। इस्तेमाल हो जाता है, तो नया आ जाता है।
हाँ,
सरकार ने 2 तरह का बीन बना दिया ना, एक में सूखा फूला जाता है, एक में गीला। गीला वाला भी काम आता है खाद बनाने, छिलके फल के छिलके विलके सारे काम आते हैं। सबसे प्यारा खाद बनता है वो, सबसे बेस्ट खाद बनता है। पर लोग कोई करता कोई, पर यही है ना कि केमिकल के बगैर तो कोई भी खाद नहीं बनाते आजकल। केमिकल मिलाते हैं सब चीज में।
तो फिर एक भी चीज है दुनिया में जो काम नहीं आती वापस से, कि सब कुछ काम आता है?
सब कुछ आता है, मैं आज तक तो काम।
हाँ, तो जैसे वो सिंगल यूज प्लास्टिक्स हैं, सिंगल यूज प्लास्टिक्स के साथ क्या होता है जो एक बार ही यूज कर सकते हैं?
वो तो हाँ, वो कहाँ काम आएगी?
तो फिर उसका क्या होता है? जैसे ग्लव्स, अभी इतने सारे सब लोग ग्लव्स पहन के रखे हैं ना, और ये मास्क पहन के रखे, फिर फेंक देते हैं।
वो भी बिकता है,
वो भी बिकता है। हाँ, अरे वाह।
आजकल तो जानवरों की हड्डी बिक रही है।
हाँ,
वो भी खाद बनता है उसका भी।
हाँ,
क्या फिक रहा? कुछ नहीं फिक रहा आजकल।
हाँ,
जानवर जो मर जाते हैं, उनके भी हड्डियों का खाद बनता है, खाल भी काम आती है। क्या फिक्र
Yeah, Guy, you just jump in if you'd like to also add anything. But essentially, what these women are sitting and talking about in this circle is that everything from the peel of a banana turns into incredible compost, animal bones, disposable gloves, single-use plastics, bottle caps. Every single thing that we generate has the capacity to turn into something else, to be regenerative. And when we say turn into something else, you know, the simplistic way of looking at it is that it can be recycled, but actually also what it does is that it's providing a livelihood for a lot of these women that then turns into the education of their children. It turns into school books for their kids, you know, it turns into a home, it turns into the first television that they buy, it turns into buying gloves for themselves so that they have protective equipment that the government doesn't provide them. So everything does turn into something. It turns into life, livelihood, and their labor is not wasted. And despite having such an embodied knowledge of, like I said, the material universe of the environment, the dignity that they feel about this work is not very much. And a lot of that is about how they're seen and how they're represented, which was at the foundation of our work, is how do we relook at this? You know, when we talk about, very often when we'll ask them, they'd say, no, but we're not educated, so why would anybody care about us? But how do we look at someone's knowledge as not being about what they are taught, but instead what they know and what they learn just in the process of doing the work that they do? So we're going to tell you a little bit about the work that they actually do and what their mornings look like. On to you, Gayu.
Yes, so this is Meenu Begum out on her morning rounds collecting waste. Over the course of the week, basically, myself and our filmmaker Philippe, we followed 3 to 4 women. So we leave, this is around October in Delhi, so it's starting to get cold, and by now it's really cold when they leave the house. It's pitch black. They wake up by about 3:34, and some of them go on their own, some of them go along with their husband, and they leave home by about 4 in the morning and set out on a cycle and walking. They're pushing the cycle along, and they have a spot that they go to where they set down their large bags, and then leave their large bags there, and then with their smaller bags start picking things. And they're basically at this point looking for things that will sell again, and that's what the women were saying in the last video that we watched, because there are a bunch of single-use plastics like chips packets, like biscuit packets, some cigarette packets that are mixed media and can't really be recycled, or they have a very low value. So really the things that have the highest value are plastic bottles, which is also really interesting, because a lot of the common perception right now is to sort of save plastic and to not buy too many plastic bottles, but really every bottle now that gets thrown away is picked and then segregated by these women and sold, and they're able to support themselves through this. So they're basically collecting plastic bottles, cardboard that's used a lot in our packaging in the deliveries that we order online, and then some metals, and then from time to time there's clothes and other things like that. So they set out super early in the morning, and they're out on foot. They walk about 5 to 6 kilometers on one round, and they usually go out really early in the morning because they're trying to go before the official, basically the more waste there is, the more they're able to collect, the more they're able to sell. So there's this hierarchy of competition as well. These are workers that are unrecognized. So there's the government workforce that comes around 8 o'clock in the morning. So these guys have to set out a lot before them so that there's actually trash that they find. And in the way that the official recognized waste workers collect our garbage, most of that garbage just goes straight into landfills. It's not segregated. So they're the only ones who, the women who we worked with are the only ones who are doing the segregation work, because there is no citywide official segregation in Delhi really. And this is the work that Chintan is really trying to implement. So, I mean, yeah, that's sort of, they're out for about 3 to 4 hours. And then once the sun starts to get really sharp and it gets really hot, they're on their way back, and they come back home to the camp. And just next door to the camp is where the segregation unit is. So this is where they separate the materials that they've collected into separate bags. And then they will continue to collect all this stuff that is segregated for about 3 to 4 days, and then do a giant sort. And then they go to the go down and sell the stuff. So they have about 2 rounds of segregation that they do in the week. So it was I mean, really, really humbling and incredible experience following these women and their families while they set out to do their work every morning. Some of them also go back out in the evening, but mostly it's the men that go out at night then. And then over here, we sort of, in the work that we were doing with them with the mural, we were occupying public space as well. But this was in a way really, really joyous, which was quite radical. Like Shiloh and us at the Fearless, we were discussing, because I mean, very rarely do we see women, any woman out in public space over here, just being out for the pleasure of it. You're always trying to get somewhere, or going to a specific shop to buy something, and then you walk back home, or you're going to drop your kids. And especially for these women, I mean, they're out on the streets to work every morning. That is their work, their space of working. But in the work that we were doing together, we were out painting on this really large wall. There was music playing, there's laughter in the background, there's women trying something they've never done before, some really excelling, some having fun, making fun of each other. So there was this real atmosphere of celebration and joy. And for these women to be occupying public space in this way was extremely radical. I'll let Shiloh tell us more about the painting process.
And at first, when we work with a community that is, well, aren't primarily painters, there's always a lot of fear that comes up. Like, I don't know how to paint. I don't know how to do this. I'm not sure. What if I make it, do something wrong? And soon enough, when we actually place a brush into someone's hand and they begin to paint, there is comfort that comes out. There is a kind of joy. And I guess that's also why art is so essential, is that it is healing, it is joyful. And so as we were out here, first day, after a lot of hesitation, they started to paint big blocks of color, and they were like, okay, this is not that hard. And by the end of it, they were like, this is not hard at all. Why don't we just turn into our own group of the Fearless Collective? Like, why are we all waste picker women? Why can't we be painters? Which, was a little bit of a joke. But on a more serious note, in India, we often find that what is considered masculine labor and what is considered feminine labor is quite binary. And while something like painting a wall a flat color, anybody can do it. It doesn't have to be a masculine task. It has nothing to do with any kind of physical limitation. But simply because it involves climbing up ladders, or perhaps being very physically seen, it doesn't become into something that women do. And perhaps there are actually, when we begin to move beyond the binaries of what is considered a masculine or feminine task, we can find ourselves actually doing work that is more fulfilling than work that we're forced into. From painting flat colors, soon these women were, Michelangelos of their own. We did an exercise where we painted an imaginary city full of houses that they wanted to live in, a city that would belong to them, a city that would make space for them and their families. Very often when we're children, we're asked You know, what do you want to be when you grow up? Who do you want to be when you grow up? But when we grow up, when we're actually engaged in labor that sometimes we don't want to be engaged with, we never get that chance to be able to dream, to wish, to ask, to wonder. And it was really beautiful because each of the women began to draw the homes that they would want to live in. They drew the streets that would make them feel safe. They drew trees, they drew public parks, they drew out libraries that their children would go and read in. And just to be able to be given space to dream in a moment where no one is dreaming, everyone is up with their backs against the wall, was healing in its own way. The women who at first were like, we've never painted in our lives before, we don't know if we're ready to pick up a paintbrush, were very soon creating the most intricate, most beautiful patterns into this imaginary city that they wanted to live in. And for us, this is really the foundation of our work, is that everybody has the capacity to live a beautiful life in urban spaces. You know, there is a huge disparity between those who don't have the privileges and those who do. Beauty has become into a bit of a luxury. But in a lot of rural India, and in a lot of spaces across the global south, even in the smallest village, even with no economic means, you'll find the most intricate, beautiful, ritualistic patterns drawn outside of doors or on the walls, or beautiful embroidered fabrics. And truly, beauty is essential. It's just the material that you use may differ based on the access that you have, but everyone has the capacity to live a beautiful life, and that's the foundation of what we do. The final image that we created is an image of a Muslim waste picker, Shanara Begum, who we've already been introduced to, with a bori, a sack on her back. And inside that sack are things that most people would consider wasted. A plastic bottle, a mask, a glove, you know, fish bones, an old love letter. But to women from this community, those things are absolutely precious. And so she gathers them into her bag. And on the other side is a woman from the Dalit community. And out in their outstretched palms is a city. And they are literally holding the city up with their palms. As we were painting this image, it was also inadvertently more political than we, I think, originally intended, because at that point, standing with the Dalit community or standing with the Muslim community was looked at as standing against our Hindu fundamentalist government. And within a lot of Hindu traditions, you know, even painting, even the shadow of a Dalit woman falling on your wall was considered inauspicious. And here we were painting Dalit and Muslim faces on a very prominent road across from the environmental ministry in South Delhi, actively taking those faces up. The affirmation on this mural says, "Hamari zindagi bhi pyari hai," my life matters. And it connects up to the Black Lives Matter movement, but also the Dalit Lives Matter movement. It's really an affirmation and reclamation of the most basic thing, which is our life matters. It's worth something. We are precious. We are essential. At the end of our murals, we always have a public performance where we bring together communities that we are working with, and we take space and we do placemaking. And Gayatri is just going to tell you a little bit about what we did over here.
Hello, hi. Yeah, so like Shaila was saying, there's this really important aspect with which we bring our project with the community to an end, which is having a fearless feast at the site of the mural. So we decided, of course, also this is in the context of a pandemic, so we were wondering how many of us could gather, whether it would be safe. And in the end, we decided that it would be very important to have this moment to really celebrate that the work that we had done together. And then the next question was like, who do we call to the feast? The feast is really about the community claiming space in at the site of the mural, and celebrating that space, you know, and hopefully like sort of with that celebration and with that occupation, really infusing life into the space and making it a space that can become one that's safe for the community in the years that follow. So we set out these tables, and all the women came in their finery with their children. And we had this beautiful evening meal where we played music, and there was some dancing impromptu that happened. I mean, it was fine. There was no trouble, and luckily, and it was just incredibly affirming for us to be witness and to be part of this celebration of life, especially because just 10 days before this there was the brutal case in Hathras where this young Dalit woman was brutally raped. And I mean, very often when we listen to stories about the Dalit community, they're just these stories of brutality, you know, and speaking about the community as victims. So this was like this real joyous reclamation of power and of life, and which was really, really incredible to be a part of. On to you, Shail.
Yeah, the mural really remains forever now as a testament to their lives and livelihood. And again, when we talk about dignity and labor, I think joy and love is a very active part of that. You know, do you love the work that you do? Is there joy around it? Are you being seen and acknowledged for it? And I think through this process, perhaps became a little bit closer to sharing a little bit of recognition towards this community that keeps our cities alive and together. As we were closing up the mural, Shobha, who's painted on the wall here, in a city full of images of Narendra Modi and politicians and kings, she looked up at us and looked up at the mural and said, I feel like someone is finally here to protect me. I feel like this mural is my bodyguard, because it's the only thing that recognizes in public space that I exist. So I think right now we have about 20 minutes left, so we'd like to open up to any questions or comments that you may have.
Anything, if there was anything that you were reminded of, or anything this work brought up for you, any responses? We showed a lot of video clips and photos. Maybe it will take a couple of minutes.
I'd like to say something, if I may.
Please.
I'm Priyanti. I'm the ED of Eurasia Pacific. And I just want to thank you. This was amazing. I mean, I know the work of the Fearless Collective, and I think it's all amazing. And you've just kind of actually shared that as well. I think there's a question in the chat which suggests that, which asks the question whether people honor the women so that they don't actually have to honor themselves. And I was just wondering, related to that, whether by doing these murals and whatever, have you seen any kind of wider societal change towards these women and their work?
Yes, absolutely, actually. So something that we're also trying to do very intentionally right now in Fearless internal worlds is to look at the impact of this work on 3 different levels. On the personal level, looking at how, by representing yourself, by seeing yourself differently, are there shifts within yourself? Is there a healing? Has something changed within you? The second is on a social level, because as we're actually out on the streets, interacting with bystanders, with policemen, with different authorities with men. There's a lot of dialogue that occurs as we're actually out there, and is a shift that happens as we're interacting with people. And finally, on the third level, on a systemic level, are we seeing systemic changes because of the public representation work that we do? And so with across the years, we've had multiple examples, be it a young Syrian Palestinian boy who was given a death threat as we're painting a wall in Beirut, him setting up a home full of refugees and a home full of people that he met in the process of painting this mural with us. And from being a refugee to being someone who actually hosts and holds a home of other people was quite a shift. There have been examples where, like I said, at Shaheen Bagh, while the protests have gone, the mural and the monument still remains. And there have also been examples where, working with a transgender sex worker in Pakistan, she was invited into her neighbor's house for a cup of tea for the first time in 15 years, simply because we were occupying that space and painting that image with her out in the streets. So yeah, we really take the impact assessment of this work very seriously, especially given that we know that with art and with storytelling, it's a little bit harder to contain. It's a little bit harder. It's not, the numbers don't matter as much as the stories and the lived experiences and shifts that occur matter. But I know in my own life, when I've begun to see myself differently, I know that that has also shifted the way that other people see me, and vice versa, I think, as well. So I think a lot of our work is aimed not only at, so just to finish that thought, not only at personal perception and shifting personal perception, but also public perception. It's both. Any other questions?
Hi. Just responding to Gayatri's message in the chat. Oh, sorry. I think the host's message in the chat. Should I go ahead?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to say that the work that you have done is really, really amazing. And I think the way that you have looked at people in humanity is quite exceptional. And of course, giving the recognition. I do know as a rights advocate just how disenfranchised and how disempowered women are, especially in our region. And I think the work that we do to recognize those most invisibilized is so essential. And I think this work is extremely inspiring. So I just want to say thank you. And we take inspiration from these activities of movement building across, this region. Thank you for sharing.
If there are no more questions, are there any other questions? If there are no more questions, then actually we would like to give you all a little bit of homework. Not quite homework, but just some thoughts to leave you through, and a little bit of an interactive exercise. I'm just going to share my screen again so you can see. So one of the things that we do, particularly when we're working with groups of activists, is an exercise called Fearless Futures. We initiated this methodology at AVID a few years ago. And again, I feel like, especially those who are engaged with social justice, we know what we resist, but we don't necessarily know and articulate what lies on the other side of that. And so we take communities of activists through these playful, seemingly playful, but actually very strategic strategies where we take communities of activists through exercises of suspending their disbeliefs and really just using their imaginations to create alternative future currencies, to create alternative future libraries, future religious systems or no religious systems, to talk about how natural resources will be distributed in the future. But from a space where we've let go of any conceptions or even wounds of the current world, so it isn't just reactive, but it is actually creative. And so one of the things that we kind of wanted to end with, if there are no more questions, is just I'd like all of you to think about, in our fearless future, how would value be defined? What defines work? Who do we work for? How are we compensated? And how do we spend our time? So if there's anyone who would like to answer that question right now, maybe even Tehani and Josephine, if you have any thoughts, maybe we could just spend the next 5 or 10 minutes taking a minute to dream about what we would want work, economy, and labor to look like in the future. T or Josephine, would one of you like to go first?
I would say in my fearless future, work has no gender, and it has no caste, and it has no class. And then what would that look like? Who would do what?
I guess for me, I can say that in our fearless future, work would be completely entwined with passion, I think, and love, just in the sense that we would enjoy and love the work that we do, and otherwise we wouldn't do it, or we wouldn't choose to do it. And perhaps there was recognition that everybody could share the work that maybe nobody loves doing. And I really encourage that anybody who's answering this question, if you can feel free to be as open and as imaginative. It doesn't have to be based on any kind of prior knowledge, but it could just be as simple as an articulation of an emotion that you want to bring into your future.
I'll add one. I actually agree with what you said completely. And I think in the future, there would be no separation between pleasure and work, and that all of the work that was difficult or challenging, one, we would have social systems to make it less so. And systems of collective support that would mean that the jobs that we don't want to do maybe don't even exist in the first place. So for example, when it comes to waste management, maybe it would be the case that we don't have, in the future, we don't have piles of unsegregated waste. We don't have as much waste as we do today, because our entire urban, like our cities look completely different. And the way that we use and consume materials is more in balance with what's around us.
Beautiful. Would anyone else like to share? I might have to even pull out the core team here to be able to answer. And I would like, if everyone can share something or the other, it would be really good. So I'm going to start calling names if people don't offer to answer.
There's one answer in the chat box. It would be really nice if you just so Nadia has said she would love for a world where work is freely chosen, where you don't have to love it, but it's also not the only option you have, which is a very, important point for us to be able to change the work that we do.
Yeah, but also actually add to that, especially because while we were working with this community of women, there was consistently this thing of like, but I'm not educated, oh, but I really want to educate my children. And this kind of vicious cycle of like trying to break out of your own economic status through pumping more money into an education system, which is also pretty broken in its own way. And I think in our fearless future, we would acknowledge that wisdom and knowledge comes in a variety of different ways, and that being educated or being English speaking, for example, is not the only way that you are valuable in society. A lot of the women that we were working with, were constantly apologizing because they didn't know English, and I felt like I had to apologize because I wasn't as fluent in my mother tongue as I wish I could have been. So I think in my fearless future, we would be dismantling a lot of that as well. Would anybody else like to add something? Shireen, Shanti, I'm just calling out names now, Marissa. It would be wonderful if all of us could offer something into this fearless future.
Hi, Shiloh. This is Ishita from ERA. Thank you so much. This is really moving and really wonderful. And I am very intrigued by your question of how is value defined, because I think even as we are sharing, what I'm struggling with is that one of the shifts that happened for me in the pandemic was thinking about all my work as being of equal value. So whether it's like me watering my plants or, putting away dishes or, writing a report, like that, all of it has equal value and should give me, an equal amount of validation or happiness. And in my fearless future, that is how work would be seen. So it kind of is like what Tay was saying, that work doesn't have gender or caste or class, and no work is inherently more valued than other work.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think that's a lesson that so many of us during the pandemic were learning as we were switching from Zoom calls to washing dishes to watering plants, is that how hard a lot of this labor is, how valuable the services that people provide to us can be. When you're forced to do everything for yourself, you really recognize how much effort goes into, and how much also skill and goes into some of the work that we don't consider as valuable as the work we do. I think in my fearless future, when it comes to social justice work in particular, also just adding to that is, I think there's a way that within social justice movements, being intricate with the issue is something that we are awarded for. And in my fearless future, actually what would be considered more valuable is being intricate with the solution rather than just the issue.
I think also during the pandemic, I was recently in a talk about care work, and care work really became visible during the pandemic because everybody's at home and you saw how much work women do in the home. And at the same time, women who might have been going out for work were now at home doing all those things all the time. Even those of us who kind of live alone and don't have families were, doing so much work just while at home. And care work became really visible. Like, what do we do on a daily basis for everybody to survive? And I think in the future, for me, it would really take, like, we would really reckon with care work and reckon with work that happens in the household, survival work, domestic work, and really reevaluate that and how can that be equitably distributed.
Hi, if I may say something, this is Humaid from the Maldives. I just wanted to add that in our fearless future, what we really need is to dismantle the current system of excess. And I am very inspired by the work of economists like Kate Raworth, who envisions a world which is in balance with nature, so that we do not go beyond the limits of our planetary resources for the sake of money. So if we are to be fearless, we demand a world which is in balance with nature, and we spend time enriching our lives instead of the enrichment of some man's pockets. So I think our fearless future requires us all to fight to dismantle the current oppressive and destructive system. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Go on.
No, I was just, there are a couple of comments that I'm reading. Someone says, Marissa here says, it would be amazing if the hierarchical constructs within work are dismantled and hence valued in a way that doesn't just value the job that you provide, the service that you provide, but you as an individual. And to add to that also the consciousness that you bring to a space. I absolutely think that's beautiful. And Nadia here says, decoupling individual worth or morality from work. Destroying the idea that people have to earn a comfortable life. Absolutely. Making some people more deserving than others. We painted a mural with a group of domestic migrant workers in Beirut a few years ago in collaboration with Amnesty International. And when we were doing this exercise on how do you want to be represented? And how do you give dignity to your work and your labor? A lot of the women who we were working with, who were all Sri Lankan refugees, Ethiopian migrant workers, they at first began to compose an image where they had like brooms and mops in their hands, like as if they were like super women with these brooms and mops. And then they were like, you know what, in the future, we don't want to have brooms and mops in our hand. Like we just want to lie in the garden and drink a cup of tea. And so we were painting this mural on labor, and we decided to paint an image of a Sri Lankan refugee, an Ethiopian domestic migrant worker, and a Syrian refugee lying on the grass in Mar Mikhail, which is a very fancy, very gentrified part of town where a lot of these women work, drinking a cup of tea. And for them, that was the most radical affirmation of that future that they actually wanted, which was a future of ease, a future of rest, where they didn't have to earn dignity or earn a comfortable life, but they could ease their way into dignity.
Thank you, everyone. I think the time has come for us to wrap up our call. It's been a great privilege to be able to present this work to you, and we're always happy to reach out to more people and looking for partnerships. So if there's anything that you feel that you might be interested in reaching out to us with, please do. We are present on social media, on Instagram and on Facebook, and our website is fearlesscollective.org. It's been wonderful speaking to everyone today. Thank you so much for joining in.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.